Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody and our panelists to join us, and we'll get started with today's webinar, which is focused on Portugal's golden visa investments and also the cultural production and artistic production golden visa options. So welcome, and my name is Paul Stannard. I'm the chairman of Portugal Pathways and will be your host today for today's webinar. It's my pleasure to guide you through today's discussion topic and gaining more insight on how you can get dual residency through the golden visa program or the cultural production golden visa and artistic golden visa production investment opportunities. And we'll be discussing with our expert panel the regulated investment options and funds for golden visa that are approved for golden visa, as well as the other two categories that we talked about. And there's two types. There's investment residency for investment and residency for donation, which is more on the cultural production visa side of it. And I'm sure at some point we will also touch on the D2 entrepreneurs visa if we've got enough time today. So let's get started. I'd like to first of all introduce David Vicani, who's the chairman of the Federation of European Investment Financial Advisors, and also founder of Beacon Global Wealth Management based in Portugal. David has over 25 years of experience in cross-border wealth management and cross-border structuring of people's income and assets. And joining David is Nuno Santos, who's a partner at CMS Tax and Law based in Lisbon, and has over 15 years experience at providing legal and tax solutions, and has significant experience in the golden visa application process and investment financial transactions. And last but not least, we have Stefan Moraes, who's a Harvard MBA graduate, co-founder and managing partner of Indico Capital Partners, with over 20 years of experience within the investment industry. He's noted for having raised over $3 billion in investment and helped 6 Portuguese companies actually get to market and actually get investments in the States and actually really turn themselves into unicorns, and that's our panel for today. So thank you all for joining us today. Our panelists today bring a wealth of experience, as I said, and very specific experience to today's topic, which is golden visas. So just a quick note for those that are watching, this webinar is being recorded. So anybody that isn't able to join us or stay the whole length of the event, this will be shared with you in a link in the next 24 hours. So don't forget, we want your questions. We've got the panel on today. This is your opportunity to share your thoughts, ask comments. Obviously, if anything gets too specific or tax related, there may be, occasions that we have to take those offline. Now, I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that the golden visa investment options have changed recently with changes to the types of investments, because real estate is no longer part of that. But actually what that's brought is a lot more regulation, and it's brought, deeper investments, whether it's technology, whether it's in investing in a vineyard, or there's many different options available to people. And we're also going to touch on the cultural production visa, which is residency by donation, and we're also going to touch on the artistic production golden visa, which is residency by investment, of which, you know, that is a lot more tricky area to navigate. So I'd like to start by talking about the fact that obviously getting dual residency is important to a lot of people these days. You know, as we move about, they have more flexibility, getting access to the whole of the Schengen region, 26 countries, and obviously gives you, you know, a great deal of freedom of movement and other benefits in terms of the investment opportunities and where they could take you. So I'd like to start with David. I know your team has been researching a lot recently the Golden Visa investment funds, along with Portugal Pathways. Perhaps you could give us some context and your perspective on, you know, what's going on and what you've seen before we dig a bit deeper with the rest of the panel.
Yeah, and I think it's a very good afternoon, everybody. I think you make a very valid point, Paul. Everything has changed and everything has moved fairly fast over the last few months and year or so, and things have moved on significantly in the golden visa world, and in also then in the type of funds that are, well, we've been looking at these, and I know wealth managers, a number of phone calls I've had from wealth managers in Portugal and other parts of Europe saying, what have you got on the gold fund front in Portugal has been quite, you know, remarkable. It's been forming relationships and doing a real deep dive into the type of funds that are available and the type of managers. Obviously, what we want to be doing is working with significantly, like we've had on these calls, you know, well-known and excellent fund management groups and golden visa groups. So very much so. It seems to me to be quite an evolving industry over the last few years. I know that these funds were there, but there certainly seems to be interesting things, interesting managers, and that's what's important. So it's really been doing deep dive into a lot of these things, and particularly with the changes that have gone on over the last few months, and, you know, therefore some interesting products. It used to be just, you know, buy a property fund sort of thing a few months back or longer. Now there's a load more, you know, much more interesting things to look at, and that's what we've been very much working with through our own due diligence and research, which has been quite significant, I think, as you know, because we've been working with Portugal Pathways in assisting with this. So yeah, no, we see it very important. It's an integral part of what people are doing. There is a significant flow of people coming to Portugal or looking to come to Portugal. So we do need to have a lot of due diligence on looking at these types of funds and portfolios, and that's what we've been doing.
No. Would you like to, you know, just touch on that before I wanted to ask you a couple of things to do with the cultural production visa? But obviously you've helped on with a lot of people through, you know, the process of golden visas. Do you want to give your perspective of what you've seen in recent times and where it's heading?
Yes, well, so as David was mentioning, I think that these recent changes on the golden visa basically brought, I think it gave more relevance to the need of making sure that the fund manager that you are working with knows what he's doing, basically. Because as you were saying, in the past, the golden visa funds or the private equity funds, which were golden visa driven, were mostly real estate driven in terms of investment strategy. And now that we have the real estate out of the picture, even when we're talking about direct or indirect real estate investment made by funds, I think that now the fund managers that are being more successful in raising capital are the ones that in fact were in the game for longer and that were effectively doing private equity in the past and not that much real estate investment. So that's clearly a trend that we have been seeing. And another thing is, in fact, this nowadays we were already feeling that that trend over the past years. But now that the real estate is no longer an option, the funds are clearly the option that clients tend to go to. And the other possibilities, like the cultural production golden visa, or even the investment in companies together with creating jobs, they are being used as well, but they don't, as we speak, they are not competing with the level of attention and attraction that the funds are having.
Great, that's really helpful. And Stefan, from your point of view, you've been around investment and raised a lot of money. What are you seeing? What's your view on it all?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. We have been really taking golden visa investments for the last 5 years, but it is true that until recently, I would say the vast majority of clients or investors tended to go the real estate option. I think particularly for those that were more conservative and that don't expect or didn't expect high returns. That was the safest option, but that's now out of the table. And effectively, the types of investors we've had in the last 5 years have been sophisticated investors that understand private equity or venture capital, which is what we do. In our case specifically, as you mentioned, we invest in tech startups that go global, from Portugal to the world. Quite frankly, normally they become American very soon and become unicorns. And we have backed the majority of the Portuguese unicorns, and they have together raised more than 3 billion with all of our other portfolio. And so I think what we've seen in the past and more recently as well is that investors that want to invest in a professional fund manager that also accepts golden visa, these investors, I think, feel that they have more comfort in the fact that funds like ours are not golden visa funds, specifically only for golden visa investors, because quite frankly, sometimes the golden visa only funds have certain clauses and certain characteristics which would not be accepted by investors, which are professional investors. Let's put it this way. And so I think that the more sophisticated investors understand that by investing side by side with the same terms as institutional investors, family offices, they probably have a better chance of having a good return. And so I think that's one thing, smart investors have been choosing funds that have institutional investors signing up as well, not only golden visa investors. And I think that particularly in venture capital, it's an asset class that tends to concentrate returns on the top funds. So I always say that it's better to invest in the top 1 or 2 Portuguese funds than in a top 10 London fund, because the problem with the top 10 London fund is that there's going to be another 9 funds on top of it that get to cherry pick all the deals. So it's a very concentrated asset class in a sense that typically, and this has been demonstrated over the years, typically the best performing funds, they tend to keep on being the best performing funds. They keep on attracting the best entrepreneurs, and therefore they end up having the best returns, raising more money and having good exits. So I'd say the 2 things that are to take into account in this new arena where real estate is not an option anymore, neither through funds nor direct, is to choose a fund that has other institutional investors, particularly international institutional investors, side by side. And secondly, do your homework as well. And I think sometimes an easy Google search will show, if the fund managers are well known, and if there's good or not so good news, particularly outside of Portugal, because a lot of these funds also tend to be very local, which I think is probably not also the best way. Having said that, I think that investing in a fund is also a way to give back to the country, in a sense that it doesn't cause any real estate issues with gentrification, which is the reason why it was killed by the government. And on the contrary, it does increase the country's capacity to innovate. It does provide for high value added jobs and better paid jobs. So I think it's a good option to get your residency, just because I think people feel that they're contributing to the economy in a positive way as well.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. That's really helpful. I just wanted to sort of move it along to Nuno, because we've had quite a lot in our inbox since Christmas. People asking about the cultural production golden visa, because it's a residency by donation, or the artistic cultural production visa, which is residency by investment, but a much lower level, half the normal 500,000. It's 200 to 250,000. Could you give the audience, a bit of your insight on what you've seen and what the differences are between the different options?
So, as you were saying, Paul, the cultural production golden visa is a residency by investment scheme under which non-EU citizens can also get access to Portuguese residency by investing in approved artistic or cultural projects. The minimum investment is, as you also mentioned, 250,000 euros, or even 200,000 euros if the investment is, or if the project itself is located in a low density area. The cultural production golden visa is split between two categories: the donation for purposes of cultural heritage preservation, or the investment in an artistic production, such as a film production, which is the one that people are talking about the most. In terms of personal experience, and even though obviously this golden visa investment route is the most cost-effective option, the reality is that there isn't a relevant experience in the market, as investors have been mostly going for the fund investment option. The fact that the returns are inexistent or difficult to estimate. So if we have the donation on one hand, which obviously doesn't have return, but even the investment on artistic production is difficult to estimate what the return could be. The fact that it involves the Portuguese state to intervene twice, and we know how we don't have that very good experiences with the Portuguese state being very proactive. And in this case, they need to intervene twice. So they need to intervene as in all other golden visa options, dealing with the golden visa process itself. But it is also up to public entities, the ones that recognize a project as being eligible for a cultural golden visa or cultural production golden visa options. So this uncertainty around this option has made that, for example, and I can tell this openly, we've had, as you were saying, some clients asking about questions about the cultural production golden visa, but to be honest, we haven't had a single client opting for this route. On the other hand, people have been, as I was saying at the very beginning, people have been clearly opting more and more for private equity funds, which obviously, even though they involve an investment of a higher investment of at least €500,000, we are talking about an investment in regulated vehicles managed by regulated and professional management entities, which have a relevant track record in effectively managing third parties' money. And obviously, another thing that the clients also mentioned to us is the fact that the investment into funds implies diversification of the risk, as funds are likely, at least, to invest in different projects. Another relevant point which clients value a lot, and this is an area where I work more closely to, which is tax. The funds not only target a return, and we expect them to comply because, as I was saying, we are dealing with the professional fund managers, but the return itself on a private equity fund tends to be fully exempt from Portuguese taxation. And that's obviously something that clients value a lot. Obviously, we also need to deal in some cases with taxation upon on the residency state of the investor, but it's always good to know that the return that was targeted for them will leave Portugal with no taxation unless specific exceptions apply, like for example people that are non-Portuguese tax resident but resident in blacklisted jurisdictions. So I think that with the number of questions that are being raised about the cultural production golden visa, I believe that this is a trend that will be established. So I think that it will, but for now, while there isn't enough clarity and experience regarding the respective process, I haven't seen clients going for it.
No. And to be honest, our research has seen the same, because we've had a lot of inquiries recently. Unfortunately, we've got teams of people phoning the Portuguese authorities, and they don't respond. They're very slow. The guidance isn't as professional as the professional fund managers. And the issue about it is you've got to source these projects as well, and there's not a easy way to do that. Whereas, say for instance, if you invested in a golden visa fund, you don't have to put it all in one project. You could put it in 2 or 3 different, some more high risk, some medium risk, whatever. I mean, David, from your perspective, from a wealth management point of view and structuring, balancing, risk, what could you share with the audience around that side of it?
I think that's really important, and it is about balancing risk. I was with a client just an hour or so ago here, and please note, despite the fact it's a Portuguese holiday, so actually even more thanks to the guys here, because it is bank holiday for them today. So, but in terms of that, balancing risk is really important, and whether that's for some people have perceptions of what they understand by risk, and one of the key jobs we do, and working in collaboration with investment partners, is to make sure that we understand what the client's attitude to investment risk is, and how they do. So when they're buying, let's call it golden visa products, and assets like that, is they do need to understand risk. So the tax thing is one thing, but it should be formed as part of an overall strategy for their long-term wealth, their long-term income. Some people have got enough money to make sort of particularly, let's call it, bigger bets on higher risk investments. And equally, a lot of people have done very well out of private equity over the years. They've done well out of sort of more esoteric classes, but it is part of forming a framework of a long-term financial vision for someone, and getting them in from a level that is important at this point to them to maybe achieve some tax goals and some residency goals, to how this forms part of the long-term part of their planning. And that's for us to do that job with them, working with our partners, so that we understand what they're buying in the first place, and then obviously how that fits in their long-term risk profiling.
Yeah, and I also, it can't be undenied, the benefits that Portugal bring, having that access to the whole of the Schengen region with the golden visa options, and the fact that you can bring some of your close family to sharing those benefits, are also important. But I think it's worth sort of going back to Stefan now, because obviously Stefan was saying about, you've got to follow people with track record. You've got to follow people that know what they're doing. But it's also, important to understand the difference between sophisticated investors and other people that are coming purely for, a golden visa lifestyle reason, and the investment is slightly secondary. But I'm sure Stefan's got a slightly different view of that.
No, I think the nuance to that is that sometimes we see people choosing on the basis of a theme, say, oh, I think, it's agriculture is the future or something like that, and therefore I will invest in agriculture. And actually, I think that's not the right way to choose a fund manager, because what you need to choose is you really need to pick the fund manager more than the strategy, because you might like the strategy, but if the fund manager is really not that good, it just amounts to nothing. And so it's really important to see the track record. One way to evaluate whether you are making the right choice or not is precisely which other investors are in there, what kind of investors have invested in this fund manager, because obviously those sophisticated institutional investors, they do a very deep due diligence, and they don't choose based on just feeling that this might be cool. They choose based on very, very deep and thorough analysis of returns. And so I think that's the best way. But again, it's more important to choose the manager itself, the people behind it, rather than the strategy. And I think that's a common mistake we see. And the other thing we see quite often, as you were mentioning, is that people split, maybe not 3 ways. I think 3 ways is very difficult because the minimum is 500, and then quite often for a good fund, the minimum investment is at least 250. So normally we see our clients either do 500,000 straight with us, or 250 with us and 250 with some other fund that they like as well. 3 ways, I haven't seen that happen, at least not with us. But again, I think that it's that our investors, what they've seen is that the process takes a little bit of time, not with us, but then with the border police and with the authorities. And so the sooner you decide the route, the better, because then the process takes some time. The time starts counting from the moment people deliver their documentation, from what I understand, but it does take some time. And it's also true that things have changed every year. So every year there's a new hurdle to make it harder for people to obtain the golden visa. And so my point here is that it seems to me that it's better to decide sooner rather than later, particularly also on the bank account opening, which you have to have an investment in a qualified fund. And that, from our experience, although we don't really deal with that for our investors, but we've seen how it goes, it's probably the part that takes longer. So decide, in my view, would be like decide for the manager and for the track record, and not so much for the theme. Forget the theme, just decide based on performance, who else is investing. Go that way, decide quickly, get your paperwork in order, open a bank account, which will take some time, and then wait. Things will happen, but it takes time from what we've seen.
Stefan, picking up on what you said, I think that we also felt an increasing trend to have clients spreading their 500,000 euros investment into 2 or more funds, but you're saying mostly 2, 3 is not that common, because it gives them a sense they are not putting all eggs in one basket. But on the other hand, we also feel that there are some clients that, when they understand that the fact that they are investing in more than one fund involves 2 KYC and AML procedures on top of the one that was already performed by the bank, basically makes some golden visa investors quit on the idea of splitting the investment between 2 or more funds. Another thing that we've also seen happening, I don't know if this happens to Indico, Stefan. Another thing that we've seen it happening is basically seeing some fund managers trying to tackle that trend of having a split between funds by having funds with several sub-funds with different investment strategies. So basically the client invests in a single fund, but he feels that because the fund has different sub-funds with different investment strategies, he is, even though he invested in a single fund, he is making sure that the diversification exists inside the fund itself. I don't know if you've seen that. I don't know if you've seen that as well, or if Indico potentially also.
I mean, I think there are some funds, particularly those that were on the real estate side, from what I understood, and they're now trying to sort of not lose the wave totally, and therefore rebranding themselves as private equity and VC. In our case, we just keep on doing what we know and not change. And we have our own diversification through, the strategies that we represent and through having, 15 to 25 companies per portfolio.
Okay.
What I think is a big difference also in what clients, investors talk to us is also the level of reporting. So when you also have institutional investors, as we do, we are used to a level of detailed reporting, not only according to regulation, which is obviously everybody has to do, but at the level at which people can talk to us all the time. There are quarterly calls where the portfolio is presented, the good, the bad, and the ugly, where people can ask questions. They get obviously a report every quarter as well, very detailed on all the metrics and all the details, even some operational details of the companies as well. And we've also seen that some people are really keen to participate not only in those calls, but to then, particularly those that are in the sector, in tech or in investment sector, sometimes they're even willing to give the companies a hand and basically participate a little bit more in depth with the investments and with the investee companies. And I think that's a bit unique to us, maybe some other fund, I don't know. But I think that's also gives people comfort that things are happening and it's not a black box. It's not just a statement, like a bank statement. It's a real industrial effort and entrepreneurial effort to get things done, to add value to the economy, to change the world in a way. And so I think that has made a difference for us. So when people understand what we do in detail, they tend to be attracted to our way of doing business, just because it's just not a financial investment only. Hopefully one which is successful, at least based on track record. Hopefully we'll continue to do fine. But more than that is feeling also, that you're part of the system, part of the process. You are heard, and you can also add value if you want. If you don't want, you just don't show up and you just read the emails or delete them if you want, and deal with the golden visa. But I think when you're deciding for a golden visa, it should be more than just getting the paperwork. I think it's about involving yourself a little bit with your host country.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, there are other opportunities out there where people have done, as Nuno said, they have split their fund out to try and make themselves, that well, we've got this, it's safe part of it, and this is the more risky part of it. But as you say, it is very much people track record, the fund managers. But equally, if you've got institutional, you've got all that reporting that the institutions demand, and the smaller investors are piggybacking off of that. I mean, David, have you got anything else that you'd add to that? Or
no, I think it's like a lot of these things is that you are taking, and I think that's absolutely right, by the way, what the guys said is that the you want to see if big institutions are using these funds as access to certain markets, you would hope that they're all doing enough due diligence at that point to almost be a key sort of saying, this is the thing you should do. So I think that's absolutely right. I think that's important. We're great believers in diversification of assets, but I think Stefan's has a very interesting point there about trying to and we've often said, be involved, and there's an awful lot, there's a lot goes into someone running an investment fund and setting a fund up. And I think there's a very good point there. Actually feel involved. You can just open the statement, but you are making a move to a country because you want to be in that country. You like it culturally. You like it because the weather's nice. You want to do various other things. So I think actually to be properly involved in that country is a wonderful thing. I mean, I drive in and around Lisbon, and it's amazing to see the number of tech businesses that are growing in the country and how those have all been developing. So a wonderful sort of source, I suspect, of humanity coming from a really good college system, and the like as well. So, I mean, that's kind of a very broad thing, but I think very much if people are giving you the heads up that funds are particularly good and are interesting and have shown, then, take that as perhaps your due diligence, as well as doing your own stuff or your other advisors and things like that. But very much so.
If I may add to that, actually,
Sorry,
just one comment. One of the very interesting things, everybody knows that Portugal is a fairly small country, fairly small. I mean, 10 million people. It's not huge. But actually, in tech, that's a huge advantage, because that means that our companies, they have to go global from day one. And quite often they become American very quickly. So they target the American market and they either sink or swim. And sometimes compared to, say, Spain or any other big country in Europe, even the UK, we tend to see that those companies stay local for longer. They develop locally and so on, but then they have to go global, which is, a stretch sometimes. And the Portuguese companies have no choice. They either go global from day one, or they will not exist. So that's actually a huge advantage of being small and having no local market.
No, I think that's a really good point. I'd like to sort of pivot a little bit now, because and some of the motivations, because not all the motivations, people are, the world is changing. It's becoming less secure for many reasons. And, many people are using this for lifestyle, dual residency. What do you think? Why is Portugal becoming so popular? And I recently, I know that it was just, again, named #1 destination for relocation and retirement. It's always very high on the happiness index. I mean, you guys, some of you have lived there all your lives. Others have spent a lot of time there and moved there. It'd just be good just to get, what are the other reasons that drive people to go for, residency, golden visas, and choose Portugal to invest in?
Who do you want to start, Paul?
David, do you want to start?
Do you want me to start as the let's call it as the foreigner on the panel? And I think that a very good point. Look, we decided here. For many years we used to come on holiday to Portugal. Thoroughly enjoyed coming on holiday to Portugal. Then thought, well, actually, with the sort of digital world that we all now inhabit, we don't have to be from my perspective, don't have to be in the middle of London to do the job that we did and we liked. So on a basis of great climate, lovely people, that we would move down here, and to some extent, any tax consideration was second to where do you actually want to live. Having said that, if you invest wisely, get yourself set up from wherever you're coming in the world, whether that's from other parts of North America, whether that is from South America, whether it's from other parts of Europe, UK, Northern Europe, then look at these. Look at all of the things that you need to do properly. But I think and this is going to sound, and I don't mean this to sound in any way British patronizing, because anyone that will tell you I'm completely different to that. But Portugal is just a really nice place full of really nice people, very welcoming throughout the country, from the north to the south, from Lisbon to small towns, and many wonderful things. So if those are things that turn you on in the first place, because then maybe look at those things, not just initially from a tax perspective, but the tax and the investment should roll on from there. And obviously, as you know, we get involved very much with people moving to Portugal or who are here and may have already be tax resident or have NHR status. So it's, from those perspective, it's planning. And that's kind of what we work very closely with people on, is their planning. But obviously the key bit way back from that is forming relationships and working with people like Stefan and Nuno to help people in there getting themselves set up. That's a very long answer for, this is a really lovely country and the people are great and the weather's lovely as well.
Nuno, do you want to go next? I think David's run to ground there.
I would just like more from the legal side. I think that Portugal has or had, and I'll explain why, two main legal instruments to have successfully attracted lots of foreign investment. The first one is the golden visa regime that we've just spoke about. The other one is the non-habitual resident regime, the NHR regime, which is a tax regime valid for 10 years that allows anyone that becomes a Portuguese tax resident without having been one for at least the past 5 years to benefit from a set of advantages, to benefit from a status that will bring them a set of advantages throughout the referred 10 years. The thing is that both of them, so both the Golden Visa and the NHR, have been very badly treated by the Portuguese government over the past year. The Golden Visa suffered relevant changes, some of them we discussed here. But it's not really about the changes, it's more the process itself that took ages, first of all, and then with different possible outcomes being published every week in the press. And that obviously brings uncertainty to the market. The NHR, in turn, has been revoked by the end of last year, even though a transitory regime is still available until the end of 2024 for taxpayers that met certain conditions during 2023. I believe it's clear that both of them were absolutely crucial for the success in turning Portugal into a magnet for international investors. So let's now hope that the Golden Visa regime is completely stabilized. And regarding the NHR, let's see how does the market react to the new impatriate regime that has been approved with effect starting beginning of this year, that we were talking about in a bit. So I believe that clearly we had two instruments that were absolutely crucial. And let's see, we will have elections on the 10th of March. Let's see how does this end. I still hope that we may have something closer to the old NHR regime than to this new impatriate regime, but it will depend a bit on the outcome of the elections.
Stefan, would you like to comment on what makes Portugal so traveling and anything that Nuno was saying there?
Yes. Well, I was actually born in London, and then I grew up here in Portugal and left when I was 21, I think, 22, and then left for about 10 years, lived in 10 different countries. On and off, I came back, but essentially I was away for 10 years. And eventually the decision to come back to Portugal was not only a family, coming back to where my family is from, but essentially what has already been said, people are very friendly in general, actually more friendly towards the foreigners than between the Portuguese themselves, as we all know, those that are here. The food is excellent. I mean, I love, food from many countries, but quite frankly, it's just unbeatable in my view. The weather is very good. I mean, it's not the Caribbean, but we don't have the typhoons either, right? So it's, the only thing I would improve would be the water temperature in the ocean. I'm a surfer, and so that wouldn't be bad. But then there would be too many people saying, so we might as well have water.
You need to go to my hometown, Madeira, where the water temperature is much better.
It's much better, yes. Madeira and the Azores are lovely. And then I think that above all, so it's a very welcoming, very diverse, very welcoming country, but at the same time, a little bit like the old days. So I think people are humble, welcoming, but at the same time, it's not too forward, right? Which sometimes in other countries, I think the clock went forward a little bit too fast. And so I think people find comfort here that this is a little bit like the old days, where, people are moderate. There's no extreme views. There's no, everybody's welcome as long as you are moderate and you're not a super activist of something. And I think that makes a difference. It makes a difference to raise your children. It makes a difference, to spend your retirement age. But I also see a lot of young people. I mean, the amount of young professionals that have moved here in the last 5 years, and that has nothing to do with the Golden Visa and with NHR. It's really that there was a huge movement where Portugal became a little bit fashionable, and suddenly we see it in our companies. I mean, the type of talent, Portugal has always had very good engineering, but maybe not so good sales and marketing people. We don't really know how to sell ourselves that well. But the truth is that with the influx of young couples and young people in general, for a number of reasons, including to go surfing 15 minutes away from the center of Lisbon, the truth is we have an incredible amount of talent right now. And many people are establishing themselves at all ages. So I think it's just a very comfortable place to be within Europe, which makes a difference, of course. It's a sophisticated country, very good infrastructure, excellent cultural access of all kinds. So it's like a mini London in a way. You know, they have people from all over the world living in Lisbon. And obviously there's a lot of people living outside of Lisbon, which is great as well. If you don't have to work in Lisbon, you might as well live somewhere else, in Cascais or somewhere else. So those are the reasons I came back, essentially to have my family here, to start a family here, and to be in a moderate, normal country with no extremes.
Thank you, Stefan. Sorry, I lost connection again there for a minute. So obviously I'm conscious of time, so I want to sort of move things along a bit in terms of the questions. Obviously, we've talked about NHR briefly there, and I think Nuno eloquently explained, you know, the importance of those two opportunities, the golden visa and the NHR tax regime. And obviously there is still a little bit of confusion and uncertainty about what will be son of NHR. But equally, there's a lot of people that maybe US connected citizens that you know, or from other regions where, you know, they weren't coming just for the tax. You know, I was on a call earlier today with a lady from Arizona who really wasn't worried that she'd missed NHR. She, you know, she wants to come to Portugal, and that's where, and she wants to break her ties even with America because she's seeking something different. You know, there's a lot of political uncertainties in many different parts of the world, and I think, you know, Portugal is a place that is very attractive to people because of many of the reasons that the panel have mentioned, and I think that goes for golden visas and relocation or whatever it is. So I'd just like to take a question now in relation to, we've had a lot of questions coming in the chat, in the inbox, and about NHR. And I'd just like to take a few questions from the chat in a minute, but I'm just looking at one here. Yeah, no, in relation to advice, obviously there's a lot of questions coming in the chat, and people say, well, we often get in our inbox, can you tell me exactly how this relates to me and my tax? And can you just give me an answer? It must be the bane of your life, Nuno, but for somebody who we're not even qualified to give that advice, and then when we don't give the advice immediately without them actually giving us any background, how important is it to share the information with your advisors so that they can help you properly, whether it's for investment, whether it's for tax or wealth structuring? I'd just be keen to get something from the panel really on that.
Look, I think that from, again, typically the questions that are raised, as you were saying, people tend to have to want a specific answer for their specific situation. I think that bottom line, we are still in a kind of a transitory era. So we had the end, from a tax perspective, we had the end of the NHR regime by the end of last year. But the truth is that there is still a transitory regime, and there are people that comply with some of the grandfathering conditions that don't even know they complied with. So the first thing that I would do would be to seek advice to try and understand whether one of the grandfathering conditions is potentially met, which would mean that they are still allowed to become Portuguese tax resident and NHR this year. So that is the first thing that I would do. The second one is, and again, we have, as I was mentioning, we have now a new impatriate regime that somehow replaces the NHR, but it involves more. The NHR allowed for people to be in Portugal with a passive income, so people that had dividends only, or interest only, or pensions only. Now the new regime requires any applicant to have to develop an effective activity in Portugal, and the activity, at least in the mainland, and I will explain why. In the mainland, it's very the scope of activities are quite limited. So in fact, we have, and I'm reading, we have as eligible teaching in higher education and scientific investigation, to be qualified employees or members of the board of entities recognized as technology and innovation centers, to be employees or board members of companies that benefit from a contractual tax incentive scheme from the Portuguese government, which is a very limited number, to also to work for companies that have been recognized by the Portuguese authorities as being relevant for the Portuguese economy, R&D personnel, working for certified startups. So the thing is, it's very, very specific. So it's not, this new regime is no longer a product, as the NHR was, that we could sell to the world as an effective product. Now it's really tailor-made for specific activities. My only hope, to be honest, is that the final version of the regime, of this new regime, states that Madeira and the Azores, so the two Portuguese archipelags, will have the right to define which are the eligible activities, not only the ones that I mentioned, but which others could potentially also be eligible. So as I was mentioning to Steve about the water temperature, I was born in Madeira, so I know the Madeira spirit quite well. So I would suspect that Madeira will be aggressive in a good way, trying to bring as much activities as possible. I'm pretty sure that the scope will be much broader than the one that we have in the mainland. So I think Madeira and the Azores will still be an option to put clients in a position very close to the NHR status. But there's one thing which is key. We had a relevant number of pensionists coming to Portugal to benefit from a 10% flat rate, and the pension income had the advantage in most cases that it could not be taxed at source, meaning that the 10% taxation in Portugal was the final taxation, and that was quite attractive. And that under this new impatriate regime, as I was mentioning, it requires an activity, so it doesn't apply to pensionists. So we will have a regime that still allows us to get 20% if we develop 20% flat rate, if we develop one of these activities, exemption on any Portuguese non-sourced income, which is very good, but it doesn't apply to pensions. So there is a niche of people that we're relocating to Portugal for this specific reason, that I think that if that was the key driver, they won't be coming anymore. But as all of us mentioned already here, obviously tax is an important factor, but it's not the only one. And the best example, which was also mentioned here, are the US citizens. That we are talking about people that even leaving the US, in principle, they will keep paying taxes in the US, because the US is, I don't know the only one, but one of the few countries in the world that tax people based on citizenship. So people are not moving only for tax reasons. And as I was saying, the US citizens are the best example. They are moving for other reasons that were also mentioned here already.
David, anything on that US point?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point Nuno makes there. I think that's absolutely relevant. It's obviously, I think the interesting thing about the US is it's taxed very differently. Citizens of the US are taxed very differently to should we say, all of us on this call, and probably most of the people the non-US people who are listening in. So it is something, but there are solutions. There are ways of going that. There are ways you can look after US assets, and the way we can look, and there are ways that the guys can assist Americans coming in and US citizens coming into Portugal. So it's whilst it's different, and not difficult, but it is more complex. There are certainly solutions for US citizens who are coming into Portugal.
And would it be fair to say they need to get advice in Portugal because they need to act like they're Portuguese?
Yeah, it's very much working with people that have the ability to look at both sides of the equation. It's very, very important. What some, you know, we're great believers in using specialists for people's situations. There's no point taking the last thing you hear down the golf club or the last thing you hear in the pub or a restaurant as how that's advice. You need to be seeking advice from professionals at both ends of the equation. You know, let's take the US as an example. At both ends of that, that way, because what you don't want to do is if you're still going to maintain yourself as a US citizen, you don't want to upset Uncle Sam, but equally you need to get yourself set up here properly in Portugal. So very much an advice-driven process.
Okay, thanks, David. I'm conscious we're getting, we need to start taking some of the chat questions. And I've just got a question here for the panel from Sean. What exactly are the fees associated or associated costs with the cultural production visa or golden visa residency by investment routes? Nuno, could you kick that one off? Or?
So the administrative costs which are charged by the government are the same in any circumstance. So we are talking about, I don't want to use the exact numbers, but we're talking about 6,000 euros per person upon the submission, and then we're talking about around 2,500 euros for each renewal of the golden visa per person. Okay. In respect of fees, I think fees, obviously, I will be more than happy to share a fee quote with anyone that requires that. But I don't think that. I think that the advantages that the golden visa and potentially the Portuguese citizenship brings, not only to the applicant, but also to their dependents, and that's a relevant point that we haven't touched upon, which is the fact that the golden visa, the golden visa allows for the family reunification, which means that if so, the main applicant, the spouse, the children, and even the parents, if they are over 65, are deemed as dependent of the applicant. So with a single investment, you are able to bring almost the entire family. So we've had lots of clients that the driver for their decision to invest is in fact to make sure that their kids at least will be European Union citizens, and that's the advantage that brings. So they can have a life in Europe with no restrictions. So that is clearly one of the drivers. So basically, this is an important note in terms of fees. I think that fees now we are limited, so fees tend to be different. I mean, legal fees tended to be different when we were dealing with real estate investment or with funds investment. We don't have the real estate investment anymore. So again, on the cultural golden visa, the lack of experience makes us even doubt on what we as lawyers will
what you can deliver,
what we will need to deliver, of course. In terms of funds, I think that you will need to deal with legal fees. Some fund managers charge subscription fees. I don't know. Stefan wants to share what is the case of Indico, but
Stefan, did you?
I think that the advantages, the bottom line, the advantage of the golden visa justify the level of fees involved, both the administrative and the legal ones.
Yes. Well,
Stefan, do you want to come in?
Sure. Well, from in what regards to funds, normally, so funds have a management fee, which normally hovers around 2% per year over a period of 10 years. It could be a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but on average, it should be around 1.7 to 2% per year. Different ways of calculating it, but that should be it. I know some funds charge subscription fees. We don't have that. Again, this would be a type of thing that institutional investors would not consider standard, but the golden visa funds, some of them do that, if not most of them. And that's pretty much it. I mean, the difference with regards to other types of investors is that you have to invest the capital up front. Other types of regular investors, they work on capital calls. So there is a commitment, say of 500,000 or 1 million or 20 million in some of our investments. some of our investors, and then we call the capital every quarter. In the case of the golden visa, the law obliges people to invest upfront for obvious reasons, because
Let me just, Stefan, if you allow me just to jump in to complement what you're saying, which is an important note, I think, for the investors. When you mean a management fee which is charged, it is charged to the fund. Obviously, it is the investor's money that ends up paying for the management fee, but it's not something that they pay on top of the 500,000 euros. So that's
correct. That's a very important clarification. So when you invest, say 500,000, it's like all included. All those fees are included, which is basically 2% a year. So you don't have. We've actually recently had a capital call this week from one of our funds, and one of our celebrity investors, actually from the US, their fund managers asked, "So does person X need to send the money?" And we're like, "No, don't send the money. He has already sent it 4 years ago. Don't send us more money. There's nothing else." It's all included. And so, but we could have said, "Yeah, just send us another 100,000," but no, not needed.
And another question that's coming from the chat, I'd just like to, and we've had this in our inbox at Portugal Pathways a few times recently. When once people pay, when do they start seeing some of the benefits of a golden visa? I know the residency thing is they've got to get it within 5 years, but we've had that question a number of times. When can they start coming and going? How does that work in principle?
So in principle, it would. So the moment in which they have all the rights which are connected with the golden visa is when they get their physical golden visa card, the residence permit. That's what allows them to spend the entire year, if they want to, in Portugal, and to freely travel within the Schengen area. This is, let's say, what the law states. From a practical perspective, and because we all know that the government was taking too long to issue these physical cards after the investment, the truth is that even the authorities are aware of this, and people that could show that they've applied and they're waiting for the card or for the reply of the authorities could be treated the same way. So they are not going to be deported if they spend more than 90 days in Portugal, because it's not their fault that they haven't been granted the visa. So from a practical perspective,
done what they needed to do.
But there were recent news. So we don't have only bad news, we have also good news. One of the recent good news was that we had an issue, as I was mentioning. So we have in Portugal the situation whereby once you have a residence permit in Portugal, after 5 years, you are entitled to request a Portuguese citizenship. The thing is, because the government or the authorities were taking too long to issue the physical card, and it was from the physical card that the 5 years would start ticking. When Portugal was telling investors, come to Portugal, invest, and after 5 years you will be granted the possibility of getting a Portuguese citizenship, that was not really true, because the 5 years would start ticking once the card is obtained, and the card being obtained was taking around 2 years ever since COVID. So we're talking about, instead of 5, we're talking about 7. The recent good news is that, again, because the government has visibility on this situation, what they are now saying, which is crucial and the game changer, is that the 5 years start ticking not from the day you got your physical residence permit, but from the day you have submitted your application. And that's a huge difference. So we're talking about people that were waiting 2 years to get their physical card, and then they would need to wait another 5 to be able to apply for the Portuguese citizenship. And these people will only need to wait another 3. And that's a big, big difference.
Yeah, no, that is a big one that's come in, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is a very big one. I'm just conscious getting a few more questions in because we are running over. In terms of a common question that's in the chat and we've had in as well, was how long, I know that they've got to stay in for 5 years, but how long do many of these funds, is it 7 years, 10 years? What happens if you have an event in terms of, Stefan, is that something you could take?
Yeah, that's a good question. So normally the funds are 10 years. So they are 5 years to invest and 5 years to divest. And once you start getting your money back, once the company, the management company, starts selling some of the companies inside the fund. And so the question that could arise, and actually did in one of our funds, was what happens if you start distributing capital back to your investors before year 5? We didn't think this would be the case because normally it takes 5 to 10 years to start selling companies. But in fact, in one of our funds, in our main fund actually, after 1 year, one of our companies became a unicorn and we decided to sell 1/3 of our shares. And so we distributed, I think, 6 or 7 million euros. And of course, the Golden Visa investors, they shouldn't get that before year 5, because otherwise they might risk losing the status. So what we do is we hold it in an escrow account until year 5, and so people can collect it after the 5-year period, so that there's no issues with the Golden Visa. This is a very rare case, right? We wish, all the companies would become billion-dollar companies in a year. It happened to us. We were very lucky. But that's the way we solved it, because effectively you shouldn't get a distribution before 5 years, so that your commitment is still there.
And David, obviously, from your perspective, from an investment management perspective, it is quite normal, isn't it? Anywhere between 5 and 10 years, and even 12 years on occasions.
I mean, I think we are always looking for let's call it medium to long term, and I think that's really what is an ideal. Goodness, it'd be lovely if we can. Stefan's team can keep finding some unicorns. That life would be kind of fun then. But in terms of that, yeah, one is always looking for and the ideal. The world goes through some fairly interesting cycles. Even annually, in fact, probably even shorter than that. So 5 to 10 years time should be a normal investment horizon for someone. You're not going to be in the same things probably after year 10 that you were in after day 1, but one is medium to longer term. And if you're looking for short terms, then that's a different type of investment yourself. And good luck with that.
Thank you. I'm going to just take one last question before we wrap up. And I know we haven't answered all the questions, but don't worry, audience. Everybody we will come back to you directly in the next couple of days. If there are any specific questions we haven't covered, we'll come back to you individually, and we will also on our post events page publish all the questions and answers. So don't worry, everybody will see their answers, but rather than hold you all on here. I just one last sort of question. It's around, and I know, Nuno, you're probably not going to be able to answer this fully, but one of the questions is, what are the tax benefits, implications of a Golden Visa? Could you just give us a sort of a 30-second sort of minute headline, really?
That is in fact the question that was or is raised a lot, because people tend to mix the fact that they, with the Golden Visa, is a residence permit, so it allows them to spend relevant time in Portugal if they want to. But what is important to stress is that the Golden Visa doesn't trigger by itself any Portuguese tax consequences. So you do not become a Portuguese tax resident because you have a residence permit, and that's the keynote or the key takeaway that I would want people to have. The Golden Visa has, so when you are not a Portuguese tax resident, you are only liable potentially to Portuguese taxation if you have income which is Portuguese sourced. So when we're talking about funds, for example, if I'm investing in a fund, and if I'm not from a blacklisted jurisdiction, and even if I am, the truth is that I don't have any tax obligation in Portugal, because my tax obligations in Portugal, even if I need to pay 10% because I'm resident in a blacklisted jurisdiction, I don't need to file a tax return in Portugal. It will be up to the fund manager and to the depository bank to withhold tax on my behalf and deliver it to the Portuguese tax authorities. So it's not it's not something that the applicant needs to be worried about. If the investment, for example, is in a Portuguese company, because we haven't mentioned this, but there is another golden visa option, which is investing $500,000 into a Portuguese company together with creating jobs. And that, for example, if the outcome of this investment is for you to get dividends from that company or to assess a capital gain on the sale of those shares in the future, in that case, again, you may pay up to 28% on the capital gain or on the dividends that you would get from that company. But we are, in most of the cases, talking about situations whereby it is up to the entity in which you invested to comply with your tax obligation. So it's via withholding tax and not really via the submission of a tax return, of course, with some exceptions. So bottom line, the golden visa doesn't trigger per se any Portuguese tax implications. The investment itself, when it involves a return, may potentially trigger Portuguese tax consequences, but not mandatorily involving ancillary obligations to be complied with by the investor himself.
Thank you, Nuno. That's a very comprehensive answer for a very complex question.
But it's a very common question and a relevant one, of course.
Yeah. So I'd like to wrap up now. I'd just like to each of the panelists to sort of give their key takeaway from their perspective that in relation to the golden visa programs and that they'd like the audience to sort of take away today and hold on to or think about. Can I start with you, Stefan, from your perspective?
Sure. Yes, I mean, if I was going to take a decision on the next country to relocate to, and I've relocated to 10 different ones, so I have some experience on that. I would definitely choose based on my preferred country by spending some time in there. Not so much the tax advantages or anything else. But since you're going to have to choose something to get hold of the card of the golden visa, you might as well choose to do something that you feel contributes to the country and invest in people that will manage your money in a professional way. And I think that's not very difficult to find out what it is. So my key takeaway, because we have dozens and dozens of investments from golden visa investors. They choose based on track record and who's the manager, not so much the theme, because the theme you might think that or that you prefer a certain theme, but the investment world is very complex and you have to be with the right people.
Thank you. Nuno?
Look, the key takeaway would be for potential investors to consider the different visa options before taking a final decision. Since, as we saw, the most cost-effective solution may potentially not be the best one. And also, in respect of the tax regimes available, talk to us and we will try to find the most efficient tax solution for your specific situation. Because even though we don't have NHR, I'm sure we'll be able to find an efficient way of relocating to Portugal.
David?
I think people moved to Portugal and lived in Portugal before NHR, and therefore it's not the great. It's not just the panacea that everyone says it is. And we discussed sort of the should we say the benefits of lovely things of moving to living into Portugal. I think Nuno and Stefan both made absolutely really great points. Nuno talking about specific reasons and specific ways of moving to Portugal and the appropriate visas. And Stefan, again, something I would agree with completely in is look at the managers, look at the performance, and looking at who you're with. Those are really critical things in long-term investment management success. So I think both, I'm really underscoring what both the guys have said there.
Thank you. And just to finish up, I mean, we're putting together a golden visa index of all of the approved funds. And we're going to be publishing that on a website in the next month or so. So I just thought I'd share that with the audience. The event, if people join late, is recorded and will be shared to everyone that registered. So you haven't missed anything. So don't worry if you joined us late. And I'd just like to now just thank the audience for being engaged and putting great questions thanks to the panel for some excellent contributions and following on behind each other and giving a great webinar today. And I just finally just like to let you know that our next webinar is coming up in the next couple of weeks on the February the 27th of February. It's on unlocking Portugal's real estate investment opportunities in 24. So that might not be through Golden Visa, but there's still a very strong and vibrant investment scene in real estate as well. So thank you, panel. Thank you, audience, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.